Hey, are we good now? Are we doing well? We're perfect now. See, it was all a warm up to get your attention. It really wasn't. It was all screwed up, is what it was. But okay, we're back to the vertical. Now we're good. We got good sound. You did the warm up, and you got what I told you I would give you. So I'm at my desk and giving you the State of the Union. It's horrendous, horrible, just horrible. You did hear me though that Biden may be big chin gigante. So I'm going to go through some websites with you. This may be 15 minutes, it may be 30 minutes. I may do this every day. I may not do it every day. I may get bored of it. I may get depressed. I may get angry. I'll tell you what's missing is callers are missing. I don't have my callers because you can't get callers on a podcast because we produce it in advance. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. Um, I don't have music. You know, one of the things I love doing on a hot night, we got a lot of them right now. We got real hot nights. I know it's considered irregular to tell you this and somewhat not believable, but in 1887, the heat was so bad in California. That's 1887. The heat was so bad that corn stalks exploded in the Central Valley. That's before the internal combustion engine came along. This is not arguing that I like pollution. I've worked against polluting the earth longer than most people in the global warming racket have. But yeah, I'd like to see a cleaner environment. But I just want to tell you there are cycles in nature, there are sunspots, there's volcanic activity, there's underwater activity that cause heat waves. And we're running through another one now. It's been awful. I don't like the heat at all. I hate the heat. I don't do well in it. I like a Mediterranean climate, which is why I love Northern California. And by and large, it's good 95% of the time. I noticed a few weeks ago that the bay had turned a diarrhea brown. And I said, what is this? Is not just an ordinary ugly brown. It's like a toilet bowl after diarrhea, to be graphic. So people said, oh, no, no, it's just red tide. It turns out I was right. It wasn't just brown algae that did it. It turns out that the sewage waste treatment plants in the San Francisco Bay Area are dumping treated treated toilet waste into the bay, which is what did it. It's killing fish that are sensitive to it, such as the long, beautiful sturgeon. I had a little video on my YouTube channel. I put it on Twitter last week of a seal in an inner canal throwing a sturgeon up and down in the air that was dead. It died from pollution. Sturgeon are very sensitive to this. It's not the brown algae, it's toilet water. So we're now living in a toilet bowl in San Francisco, not only on the streets of the city under Nancy Pelosi, but the human pollution has now infected the bay. That's how evil these people are. These sick, evil Democrat bastards are so bad that they've let human waste run into the San Francisco Bay, and they're posing as environmentalists, posing as saviors of the downtrodden. Meanwhile, the homeless run rampant through the Bay Area, crapping in the streets, peeing in mailboxes. All the while, the Nancy Pelosi's act like the saviors of the poor. Meanwhile, millions of illegal aliens from the third world come over the border, bringing their diseases, their crime, and their drugs with them. Don't tell me they all come here to work. You're a naive liar if you believe that. They come here to sponge off the system. Like in New York City, they're putting them in hotels. Putting them in hotels, can you believe it? Meanwhile, veterans are laying in the streets. It's an upside down world. Things are bad, and they're going to get a lot worse because we have gangsters running the country right now. Everything they've said about Trump was false and is being done by Pelosi, with Biden as her stooge. It's Pelosi behind it all, by the way, in my estimation. It's Pelosi, Pelosi, Pelosi. It's the big Staquito bust out. Watch The Sopranos again when they take over the sporting goods store. That's what's going on in the country. It's the Staquito bust out. That's what you're watching in front of your eyes. And all the while they're busting out the store, they're telling you they're saving the store. Things are bad, and they're going to get much worse before they ever get better, if they can get better. If we do have midterm elections, and if we do, will they even be valid? Many of us don't believe it. Many of us believe that these 4 million illegal aliens brought in by Pelosi and the Biden gang were brought in to be illegal voters. We're not all crazy. We're not all crazy. So I can go to websites and I can do that for you. What the hell is the difference? I'm going to go on websites for. What are they going to have on it that I can talk about that I can't tell you off the top of my head? Because I've been reading today from my book, Stop the Coming Civil War. I wrote it in 2013. It was published in 2014. Unfortunately, I had to put the word stop on the cover to placate the publisher, who was no longer publishing conservative books. The great editor who did 5 of my books, all best New York Times bestsellers, raging bestsellers, was fired by the wokesters who took over Hachette Publishing. Someone wrote this to me on February 26, 2022. He said, Dr. S. absolutely floored reading Stop the Coming Civil War, pages 236 to 249. Wow, there's a whole podcast on Ukraine there. And I wish Newsmax would give you a 30-minute special to go over the lead up to this conflict that you wrote about 8 years ago. 8 years ago, you wrote about Ukraine. You even mentioned downclassing terrorism by the NSA, page 237. Allow more spying on us at home. Now we are all domestic terrorists. Fast forward, he writes, to the present Ukraine. At the center of all this now, we have a crooked president and his crackhead son who have received so many lucrative personal kickbacks from this conflicted region that it's hard to imagine it's about America's national interest versus connected oligarch elite interests. Biden's have been in bed and embedded in this since his time with Obama, past and present, writes this interested party. While all eyes are on this crisis, the drooling dunce John Kerry is working on the next crisis. They, Klaus et al., are telegraphing the climate crisis, which is now to blame for everything. I think the EU, now simply NATO / Great Reset subjugated nations, along with Biden, are trying to shut Russia out of the energy resources sector, something Russia can't afford. 25% of Europe natural gas comes from Russia, 80% of that flows through Ukraine. Everyone needs to sell their goods, feed their people, need their tax revenues to pay off debt, manipulate gas oil prices, close Keystone, where the demand price curve is maximized, blah, blah, blah. As you all know, we all have a huge supply of U.S. natural gas. And why is there a new environmental war against it? Now, no new hookups on new buildings in many places, encouraging electric appliances over gas. Supposedly, they leak, harming the atmosphere. If environmentalism, he writes, is a global atmospheric issue, it's hypocrisy to shut its use down here while selling our reserves abroad. Obvious manipulation is the only explanation. Righto. Staketo bust out. Everything Staketo bust out. Battleground Ukraine. And it's not a fight over access to gas and oil, but over the primely located street corner to sell distributed. The notion that it's about democracy and Ukraine's sovereignty is nonsense. One only needs to read Stop the Coming Civil War to see the mess we have helped orchestrate in Ukraine and the past regimes we've supported. It was supposed to be back to business by the Biden administration, picking up where they left off pre-Trump. Putin stopped toe-to-toe Joe. There will be no NATO missiles pointed at Russia and Ukraine. Joe won't take over the natural gas distribution to Europe. A deal Joe should have taken when offered. Another embarrassing Biden diplomacy failure. An unstable presidency causing global instability. Toe-to-toe Joe got KO'd. Good day, doctor, says Robert. He's a very, very bright guy. I guess I should read my own book to understand what he's talking about. So I think I'll look into those pages a little later. This section in Stop the Coming Civil War, 236 on Ukraine. Let's see what Michael Savage wrote back in 2013, published in 2014, and see if there's any veracity to it. Ooh, big word, veracity. I'll bet the press secretary to Biden doesn't even know what the word veracity means. She never stepped on it. The NSA and American insecurity. Oh, it's boring. I don't want to read it. In Syria, let's move on. Not interested. Ukraine. Page 242. Let me make sense of what happened in Ukraine for you, Savage wrote. The legitimately elected Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, was ousted and the country placed in the hands of rebel forces spearheaded by Chechen Islamist radicals. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, along with Obama's advisor Susan Rice, are neoconservatives. The neocons don't care which side you're on as long as they can work with you to create a political situation that they can grow into a war from which they will profit. Ooh, who wrote that? The so-called Ukrainian Revolution was fostered and encouraged by Nuland, Rice, and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Piat. Over the weeks leading to the February 2014 uprising, these three were instrumental in staging a destabilization campaign. Working with Ukrainian rebels, they fostered the Ukrainian uprising that caused Yanukovych to flee from Kiev, is written here. In fact, it was Nuland herself who selected the new Ukrainian prime minister. She had this lined up 3 weeks before the insurrection in Ukraine started. Nuland's famous statement, F the EU, was leaked early in February, and it was a covert admission made public that we're on the side of the insurgents. That recording revealed that the administration favored installing Vitaly Klitschko as their choice to be deputy PM of Ukraine, with Arseny Yatsenyuk, Yats, as they referred to him, being their choice as prime minister. Now, here it comes now, for those of you who can follow the bouncing ball. Arizona Senator John McCain. Oh, ring the bell. I don't have one. Gong, gong, gong. John McCain was also part of this duplicity. McCain went to Kiev in December of 2013 and helped incite the mobs who would ultimately overthrow the legitimately elected president. If there was such a thing as a Nobel Anti-Peace Prize, I wrote, McCain would win it hands down for his work in Egypt and Syria, topped off by what he's done in Ukraine. McCain was proposing nothing less than we stage a military intervention in Ukraine, as he's done many times before. McCain was in Syria, secretly backing rebels there, rebels who turned out to be Islamist radicals, supposedly our sworn enemies. Woo! McCain, the war hero. McCain also made a covert trip to Libya, where he received an award from the military. This happened on the very day Sharia law was declared in that country, the same day McCain arrived. Oh, he really is the Manchurian candidate. While he was in Ukraine, McCain met with a number of rebels who were intent on regime change in that country, and he expressed regret that he wasn't having success, saying, I do not see a military option, and it's tragic. That's John McCain, war hero. The U.S.-supported insurgents took over Kiev and held the Ukrainian people hostage as the United States stood down and Putin amassed forces on the Russia-Ukraine border. As this was happening, Barack Obama mouthed the emptiest of words. There would be, quote, costs to Russia for military action against the insurgents, while the United States found that its hands were tied. In the early days of the rebellion, former Ukrainian President Yanukovych met with the rebels staging the uprising, and the two parties agreed to stop the violence and make an orderly transition to a new government chosen in a new set of elections. Instead, the right-wing rebels ignored the agreement and took over Kiev by force. Those would be the Nazis that Putin is talking about, the right-wing rebels, the Nazis who wear the same badge that the SS wore. You may not know that. The Azov Brigade, they wear the same insignia as the SS of Hitler. They took over Kiev by force with their armed patrols maintaining control through violence. The situation in Ukraine, remember I wrote this in 2013, published in 2014. The situation in Ukraine, I wrote this 10 years ago, don't tell anybody. The situation in Ukraine has been painted as a conflict between Vladimir Putin's Russia, the so-called bad guys, and Ukrainian rebels, the so-called good guys, who seek to oust Russia from a position of influence in Ukraine, install a new government that will be responsive to Ukrainian people. Don't believe a word of it. It was written in 2013, published in 2014. The Ukrainian nationalists are fascists. Washington's original purpose for staging a coup in Ukraine was to move Ukraine away from Russia and bring Ukraine into the EU. In other words, the neocons and the bought and paid for moderates in the Obama administration wanted to wrest control of Ukraine from Putin's hands and gain economic and energy control over the country. As one commentator has pointed out, Western nations, with the United States leading the way, have been provoking Putin for decades. We've expanded NATO to include former Soviet states. Ukraine looks like the next target, and we've attacked allies of Russia, including Libya and Iraq. The United States, along with other Western nations, through our incursions into the politics, economics, and national security of Russia and several of its allies, has effectively caused the situation that resulted in Putin standing ready to invade Ukraine militarily if necessary. Written in 2013, published in 2014, happened in 2022. Putin is certainly not a good guy, Savage wrote, but he is not the villain in this. The Jews have always been the canaries in the coal mine of human rights in Russia, and Putin has been better to Russian Jews than any other Russian leader in the past century. With the elected government now driven out of Ukraine, the anti Semitic US backed fascist thugs who have assumed control are vandalizing synagogues and threatening the lives of Jews in Ukraine. Now, I'm going to pause right there. They're so clever that they installed a Jewish head of state in Ukraine called Zelensky, the guy in the undershirt. Did you know that? He's the front man for the fascists. You didn't know that. I'm sorry. You didn't read that in the New York Times. Well, I can go on, and I'll continue here. Obama's attempts at thwarting Putin have essentially forced him to deploy military assets to Crimea and to annex that country. Crimea is an important region that Russia ceded to Ukraine in the 1950s when the USSR was reaching the height of its power and Ukraine was one of its puppet states. Let me give you some background that will help you understand what went on in Russia, Ukraine, and Crimea after the fall of the Soviet Union. I can't read any more of this because if I do, you'll come to understand I'm an enemy of the state because I know too much. And I don't want to be an enemy of the state, you see. We've come to understand that those in charge right now consider anyone who disagrees with their worldview as an enemy of the state. So you may not know what's going on in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but I wrote this in 2013, published in 2014. And I'll conclude the chapter in this little YouTube broadcast today by reading the end of this chapter. A small group of insiders in the US government who have strong allegiances to a powerful group that favors war are running our foreign policy. And it's our allies who are most likely to be damaged by it. No, they've all joined the parade. I was wrong about that. Our allies were not damaged by it. They joined the fascist parade. Where US interests are open to being undermined, George Soros is never far from the action. Soros funds the Open Society Foundations, which provides grants to agencies in EU countries that are actively working to undermine Russia. In a piece he wrote recommending that the EU intervene economically to help Ukraine keep Ukraine financially viable, Soros had this to say, and I'll quote him now. The EU, along with the International Monetary Fund, is putting together a multi-billion-dollar rescue package to save the country from financial collapse. But that will not be sufficient to sustain the national unity that Ukraine will need in the coming years. Ukraine will need outside assistance that only the EU can provide, management expertise, and access to markets. That was Soros then. And we see what's happened since. We're seeing American foreign policy at its nadir, I wrote. The savage truth stopping the coming civil war. And then I went on to the world liberal revolution in the back of the end of this book. Make no mistake about it, the world liberal revolution. It's come almost to its conclusion now. And I said this book is not just about the coming civil war in America, it's also about the conflict that the current administration is pushing in the name of a broader worldwide liberal revolution. As I see it, the forces of the left are attempting nothing less than a socialist takeover of the world economy and global politics. The world liberal revolution is what the tens of millions of conservative, law-abiding Americans are fighting against, often without even knowing it. We are the equivalent of the anti-communists who fought Stalin. The conservatives in our nation, those who still believe in the family, what an antiquated statement. That doesn't match the LGBTQ trans agenda, does it? Those of us who still believe in the family and personal and religious freedom in the Constitution of the United States, who are standing up to an increasingly overbearing federal government, we are the new resistance. Everything is at stake. Unless the power grab is arrested, we will all become serfs in the New World Order. In the Soviet Union, if a person did not comply, I'm talking now to the TikTok morons who may have accidentally stumbled upon this Michael Savage broadcast on YouTube. In the Soviet Union, you don't even know what that is. All you know is what abs look like and breasts. In the Soviet Union, if a person did not comply with the dictates and politics of the Communist Party, at first they were ignored. That meant any reference to them disappeared from the Soviet newspaper Pravda. I, Michael Savage, am the most famous media personality in the history of San Francisco Bay Area. Starting with a local show 20 years ago, I then became famous for my writings and my radio show, which was syndicated nationally and carried more than 300 radio stations around the United States. And now I'm a famous podcaster. And yet in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm unknown. I'm ignored, never seen in the newspaper, never mentioned by the local Pravda. It's as though I don't exist. I'm in a liberal gulag in which the only things that are permitted to be talked about are the weather, actors, singers, sports figures, degenerates, anti-Americans, occupiers, and Democrats. These are the only heroes the American media will talk about. Those who oppose the individual freedoms championed by Western civilization are considered heroes, while those of us who uphold Western values are looked upon as pariahs, as the enemy. And I wrote this: unless this liberal revolution is stopped and turned back, there will be a civil war in the United States, which is more than likely to be crushed by a leftist government that is already preparing to quell what it anticipates will be massive civil unrest. Again, Stop the Coming Civil War, written in 2013, published in 2014. As a result of this book and many others, like me, Donald Trump was elected. And you saw what they did to him. What they said was, let's show those bastards what we do to them. We'll start with the head of the entire revolution for freedom in America. We'll crush Donald Trump. We'll invade his home. We'll steal his wife's panties. And we'll be cheered on by the vermin in the media who will say, yeah, take her panties, steal her panties. You get it? Well, what can I say? Have you heard any of this? Was the sound good? Because I'm just about through. Tell me that the sound is good, and we'll do a cheer. Good now. Has it been good all along or not? Or did the book block the sound? Well, I'm going to end this now. I've been on for 26 minutes. I meant to be on for 5 minutes. I've given you a 1-hour radio show because, radio shows of an hour in length are 25 minutes in length. With the ads, that's what drove me out of radio. I'm so glad I'm not on radio. I couldn't take the ads anymore. 5, 6, 7 minutes of ads in the middle of and then they want you to do live reads. We're in the middle of discussing philosophy and politics. You got to then talk about a douchebag or I don't know. You had to work it in like it was part of the natural flow of things. I couldn't do it. I said, I'm not like the other hosts. This is not a joke for me. It's not a job for me. It's my passion. It's my interest. It's my life. I'm still a Boy Scout. And so here I am. I have the freedom of the podcast twice a week on Newsmax TV till that doesn't. Eventually, this will all end too. They control the advertising industry. They control the satellites. They control virtually everything that you hear goes through the filters controlled by the few powerful hands that control it all. And eventually, it'll be us alone in our rooms talking to ourselves, which is exactly what they want. But while I still have the freedom of speech and God's ability to formulate my speech in a cogent manner, I will try to do these along with my 2 podcasts a week. And I'm going to say this to you again. This is free, as it should be. My podcasts are free, except for those who subscribe, who get them without ads. And I love my advertisers because without them, I wouldn't do any podcasts. I have to support the production staff. I have to support a lot of other elements to make this work. So if it wasn't for the advertisers, I wouldn't have a podcast. God bless them that I have a great, great ad team for my podcasts, and you can patronize the advertisers if you want. I'm not going to mention them now because I don't want to. But what I've just done for you is perhaps the beginning of a daily YouTube piece. Maybe not. I said I would do it 3 o'clock Pacific, which is 6 o'clock Eastern. It's now coming on to 6:34 Eastern. I gave you about 30 minutes of a broadcast. And I may do this every day. I enjoy it. I may do it on YouTube. And this is a YouTube show. Now, I understand what the jealous enemies that I have will say. Well, he only had 10,000 or 5,000 or 8,000. It doesn't matter. Sure, I'd like more. But I'm not 11 years old showing my abs. I'm not an 11-year-old showing my behind. And so if you have content like this, it's very hard to maintain, to attract and maintain an audience, especially if you're an older guy with a white beard. In some cultures, age was considered wisdom. In our culture, age is despised, it's hated. Youth is worshipped in America, as it shouldn't be. And that's why the society is dying, because the stupid and the idiots, the perverse and the deviant are running the media, and they want to keep you distracted and dumb and stupid watching pornography, drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Go to Burning Man, man. Talk about the environment and leave the desert a shithole, a shitbox. Leave human feces everywhere. Leave garbage when you leave the desert. Pollute the atmosphere and call yourself environmentalists. Yeah, right. Go to Burning Man and call yourself cool. Well, that's it for the day. This is the Michael Savage YouTube show that may or may not be back. I don't know. You know, every day is different for me. God, I wish I could play the music for you. You know what music I would have played today? I would have opened with Fats Domino called Blue Wednesday. And I would have closed with something I had on the radio, but I can't use music because it's licensed, you see. That's the thing. You'll have to buy a big license to run it on a show. I had the best radio, I had the best music in the world. People call me and say, please go back to radio. No, there's no going back. That was then. I did 26 years. It was my fourth or fifth career. And that's what I wanted to do. And now I'm doing this, and I'm doing the two podcasts. So you better go to Michael Savage Podcast, the Michael Savage Podcast. Many people, I can meet older people. Oh, I don't know how to get a podcast. You go on an iPhone and say, find the Michael Savage Podcast, and there it is. It pops up. So many people who are older don't even know what a podcast is. Fortunately, it's done very well. I got a lot of my audience to go over to it. The one thing I miss are my callers. I'd love to talk with you. I can't. I'd love to get callers. I was the best in the business of actually hearing callers and talking to them. All the program directors who knew me said, you're the best at callers because you actually listen to them. So one of the things I like doing on a hot night, and it's been so hot here, I don't even do it. Wait, is top down Corvette, C8 Corvette, bought it last year, only has 1,500 miles on it. And I put on my Apple Music and I listened to old rock and roll. And the one that I liked the most was Party Doll the other night. I love that song. I know all the words to all these old songs, and they bring back so many beautiful memories of America when the chrome was thick and the women were straight. Bye now for Borders, Language, and Culture. This is Michael Savage signing on by signing off.